Good afternoon and welcome. This is Megan Mansfield from Accordant Company. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar from AvidXchange titled TimberScan Titanium for Sage Intacct. Our presenter today is Mike Carbino, Senior Product Director at AvidXchange. Before we get started, I want to address a few housekeeping items. Everyone is muted for a clean listening experience. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions box. We will collect the questions and address them at the end of the session. For the best viewing experience, please maximize your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be provided via email. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike.
All right, Megan, thank you very much and welcome everyone. Good morning. So a couple of things before we actually jump into the presentation. First, if you are not familiar with our solutions, in particular titanium, which we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to give a quick history lesson as we get into the products. But also wanted to mention that we have had a long-standing relationship with Accordant Company and many clients. If you're not familiar with our solutions, if you're not familiar with TimberScan or titanium, that we have many clients that are using our solutions today. So we've been working together side by side for many years and have a number of clients that we work on together. So with that, let's go ahead and I'm going to start with a brief PowerPoint slideshow, just a few slides just to kind of give a bit of an overview, and then we will jump into the application. Okay, so TimberScan Titanium. Some of the benefits: gaining control, so you can take on more with TimberScan Titanium. So let's talk about the kind of these four primary aspects of the application. One being keeping control. So the idea behind titanium is to centralize your accounts payable. And when we say centralize, that doesn't mean everything has to be in one place necessarily, but it's all in one platform. So it's easily accessible from anywhere. You can analyze the data. You can customize things like being able to see dashboards, in certain ways to be able to see information. So it's all about being able to manage the information from the perspective of being able to see everything in one platform. Gaining efficiency, very important. Enable the routing and workflow. So uploading documents from for example, an email inbox and skipping that manual entry of AP invoices with optical character recognition. So these are all things that we've provided to allow for the ability to be able to do things more efficiently, to not have to go through that manual process. And those are things that we'll touch on and we'll cover today as we get into the application as well. And then also securing payments. So when we refer to TimberScan Titanium, we refer to it as a purchase to pay application, meaning we manage the accounts payable invoice from the initial purchase all the way through the payment process. And we're able to effectively eliminate the paper all along the way. So that doesn't just necessarily mean eliminating the paper of the invoice when it first arrives at your door. It also means that we can eliminate the shuffling of the invoice off to approvers. It also means that we can eliminate that manual process of printing checks. We have the ability to be able to automate that entire process from purchase to pay. So we're going to touch on that. And then finally, the seamless integration. And this is something that I'm going to get into in a little bit more detail in a few moments. But one of the things that we've done is, for Sage Intacct, for Sage 100 Contractor, for Sage 300 CRE, we've built the application in such a way that it allows us to be able to integrate with those applications as if we're basically just kind of piggybacking or sitting on top of the application. We exchange data back and forth seamlessly. We replicate the accounts payable invoice entry experience. So it's not like you're having to enter something that's in a completely different AP entry screen. It's all kind of familiar with what you're currently doing. You'll see that today when we go into Titanium. Okay, so for those who are not familiar with TimberScan, perhaps you were not using TimberScan previously, but you're currently using Sage Intacct, and you're potentially looking at how Titanium could help you, with that AP workflow process. A lot of times, what we see when a company initially knocks at our door is, I'll typically ask the question, well, what are you doing today? And I get a lot of different answers, but a lot of it all comes down to and back to the same thing. And that is that the invoices are being managed manually, meaning that they may come in, whether it's email or mail, they get printed, they get placed in someone's folder. The approver picks up the folder, has to hand code the information on the invoice, sends it off to to accounting. Accounting has no idea when they're going to get the invoice back. Once they finally do get the invoice back, they have to go through the process of keying that invoice into the ERP, in this case, Sage Intacct. And then when payments are executed, those payments are done by basically printing out checks. So what we're able to do in TimberScan is take that manual process, and we can replicate it, but we can do it all electronically. So instead of having to receive the invoice necessarily in the mail, or even if you do receive it by email, instead of having to print the invoice out, there's no reason to do that. We'll just go ahead and you can take the acquire process in Titanium, and you can acquire the invoice. You can drag and drop. You can acquire from an email. We'll talk about that. Once the invoices get acquired, they go to initial data entry. So what we're talking about here is we're not sending them off to the approver and have them hand code information and send it back to accounting. It starts in AP. That doesn't mean that the invoice has to be fully coded in order to send it off to the approvers, but it means that we're going to at least have some of the basic information, the vendor number, the invoice number, the date, the amount, perhaps what project it's associated with, and then it's going to get sent off. And a lot of that data that I just mentioned can be automatically populated without any user intervention using our optical character recognition tool. Once that basic information is entered, it gets sent off to the approvers. It's done so using a series of workflows that you're able to set up. They can be very, very robust. You could have scenarios where you say, well, we route invoices to, a number of different people based on, for example, the project that it's associated with, or if it's a specific vendor, we don't send it to those people. It goes somewhere else. All of those things get taken into consideration in the workflows, and then the invoices get routed off accordingly. Once the approval process is finalized, those invoices get seamlessly sent to Sage Intacct. There's no export import process. It's all done behind the scenes using the APIs that we've integrated with. So it's now updated Sage Intacct. Your invoices are now sitting in Sage Intacct as if they were keyed in there. All of the invoice attachments are associated with that. So it could be the invoice image, could be maybe a purchase order, receiving ticket, packing slip, whatever happens to be associated with the invoice. And then once that invoice is updated into Intacct and you're ready to make the payment, we have the ability to manage that payment process and release the payments so that you're not having to print checks. So we can handle all of this through our application, and that's what I'm going to talk about. We're going to cover here in just a few minutes. So I think what we'll do at this point is I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint. However, I did want to also mention that if you're currently using TimberScan, and your thought is we're planning to upgrade to Sage Intacct, for example, and we'd like to take our TimberScan data with us, we do have a migration path to allow you to do that. We can talk about that in more detail, but it gives you that opportunity to take your invoice data that currently exists in TimberScan and very easily and seamlessly move that to Titanium, so that when you're running on Sage Intacct and you're using Titanium, all of your TimberScan invoices that you've been processing for the last several years are now sitting in Sage, are in Titanium, and they're available to you. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to break out of the PowerPoint at this point, and let's go into the application. Sorry, get a few screens shrunk down here. So I mentioned that I wanted to kind of give a bit of a little history lesson. This will only take a couple of minutes. But I think it's important to emphasize that for those of you that are viewing today's presentation who don't use TimberScan today, that this is an application, TimberScan, that we built several years ago for Sage 300 CRE. So this is not where I'm going to be doing the demonstration. Don't worry, I'm going to move on to Titanium here in just a couple minutes. But I think it's important to just show you a couple of things that we've done in TimberScan that you're going to see in Titanium, and we've actually enhanced that functionality in Titanium. So for example, the way that we go about our AP invoice entry in TimberScan. Again, I mentioned when we were going through the PowerPoint slides, the AP invoice entry experience mimics that of the ERP, in this case, Sage 300 CRE. So if I were entering an invoice in TimberScan, I'm basically using all of the same fields as I would if I were in Sage 300 CRE. We pull up compliance information if need be. If it's a duplicate invoice, it's going to stop me and let me know that there's a duplicate immediately. So again, tying back to the integration with, in this case, Sage 300 CRE. When we move on to, I'll just go ahead and append this. When we move on to the dollar amount, for example, and we work down to the distribution, we can call up commitments, for example, from purchase orders that have been created in Sage 300 CRE, and we can pull up all this information on the screen so that you can process the transactions accordingly, and it brings up all the data that you need. Lo and behold, we do all of this same functionality in Titanium, and actually I think in many cases we do this functionality better. So I'm going to break out of here now. We're going to go over to Titanium. We're going to start, but I just wanted to give you a sense that the solution, the Titanium solution that we've built, that we integrate with Sage Intacct, is in many ways a reflection and a replication of what we've done with TimberScan for Sage 300 CRE, only we've enhanced it. We've made it even better. Okay, so let's use that as our backdrop. And let's jump over now to Titanium. So I've logged in already. I may get kicked out because we do have a timeout feature and I haven't been in here for a few minutes. So chances are when I start to process something, it'll throw me back out to my login. But anyway, you notice the screen. This is Titanium is a browser-based solution that runs in the cloud. So again, it follows the same principles as Sage Intacct, a cloud-based solution with a browser, right? Everything is chosen from the side panel, as you see here. So I could select anything from the side panel, and each of these menu items, many of them have sub-menus underneath. So we're going to actually get into some of these as we go. You also notice that Titanium has some nice dashboard reporting functionality, basically kind of right out of the gate as I first log in. So what I'm seeing here, let's say that I've logged in as an administrator, and I have access to be able to see everyone within the organization. So what this is telling me at this level is I'm seeing everyone. I'm seeing, in essence, the total number of outstanding invoices for the entire company, what our total outstanding payables are. It looks like $1.7 million. And as you can see, we've got an invoice that's on hold, and we've got a lot that's overdue that needs to be paid. So obviously we've got to get going here. But as I kind of work my way down through the various widgets, I can also look at this from a vendor's perspective, project down to the task level, who it's assigned to, and then we've got other more detailed information. You notice here, if I wanted to actually go down and look at specific tasks, I can see what the dollar amount is and how many of those particular transactions are sitting out there. As I hover the mouse on these pie charts, you notice how it brings up these tooltips. It will tell me how many invoices we have outstanding for A1 Electric, for Superior Plumbing, Beaverton Sand and Gravel, so on and so forth. Same thing by project. So I can see, for example, what we have outstanding on the Fullerton Warehouse project by task, if I want to go down to that level, and so on and so forth. So you've got some good detail that you can look at right from this outset here. And then I can start to also see who some of these invoices are assigned to. Now, I mentioned that I'm logged in as an administrator. So maybe what I might want to do is I want to get a little bit more of a visibility into who has what. So I can just focus in on a particular person, and I figured I'd probably get kicked out. Bear with me. I can focus in on a particular person, and when I do that, I'm now looking at their invoices. So in this case, Leanne has 17 outstanding invoices. Here's her total outstanding payables, and here are the vendors she's working with, the projects that she happens to be associated with, and so on and so forth. So it gives you that ability to see things at a top level, but also quickly drill into individual approvers, for example, and be able to see what they have outstanding. So it's not, I don't have to search around and try and figure out, well, where the heck are these invoices? How many invoices does Leanne have that she needs to review and approve? It's all basically right here in front of me, and I can see it right on the screen. So when we talk about that concept of visibility and accessibility, here's one example of how we can do that. Now, having said that, if I happen to be someone who, should not necessarily be accessing top level information, maybe I'm an approver and I need to, the only thing I should be doing is seeing my invoices, then when I log in, that's all I'm going to see. I won't see anyone else's. I'll be restricted to just me, and I will be looking at just my invoices. I won't have any access to be able to see anyone else. So you can set this up with individual users and give them rights to whatever you want to give them access to. All right, so let's start into the workflow. Invoice arrives at your door. To get it into Titanium, you would select the acquire function, and then you're going to go through the process of acquiring some invoices. Several ways in which you can do this. So one thing you can do is you could drag and drop documents into the screen here. I'm going to explain what I'm doing with these fields here in a second, but what I can do is if I have, let's say, an invoice that got emailed to me and I want to just grab the attachment, or maybe it's something that's in a folder or in a file and I want to just take it and drag and drop, I can go ahead and do that. Bear with me. Make sure that, let's see what's happened here. For some reason, it's not letting me drag that file, and I don't know why. There we go. Okay. All right, so I can take a document, I can just go ahead and drag it, and you notice how it just automatically pops open here when I say continue into the viewer. I have the option of just scrolling up and down through the various pages, and I can also open and close my thumbnail that you see here at the top. I've got all my annotation tools. If I needed to make the invoice larger or smaller, I can do that. If, for example, I had a scenario where maybe page 1 and page 2 are two separate invoices and they didn't split automatically, what I can do is I can just right click and say split here, and it just separates those invoices as you see. Anything else that I needed to do, maybe delete a page or something like that, insert more pages, all of those things are possible. And then when I hit acquire, it's going to send that invoice or these invoices to my AP bill entry and my purchasing entry queue. And I'm going to talk about these in a few minutes when we get there. So drag and drop is one option. Second thing is Titanium has an email monitoring tool. And what it does is it works behind the scenes and it can monitor an email address. It can actually monitor multiple email addresses. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we have an email address at AP at whatever our company name is, where we've asked vendors and subcontractors to email their invoices to. So Titanium is working behind the scenes. It's looking at, it's looking at that email file. And when an invoice and when an attachment comes into that particular email address, it takes the attachment, automatically drops it into a file that we link to Titanium. And then in here, I can just go in and I can grab a whole batch of invoices all at the same time, and I can just pull them up and I can open them up into the into that particular file. I think I didn't have my images linked properly. Their invoices here, but anyway, the whole idea is that I can just go ahead. I can take those particular invoices, and when I do that, it does the exact same thing that we saw before. I would just go ahead, I'd be pulling those invoices into the viewer, and when I'm ready, I just go ahead and continue, and those invoices get passed on to AP invoice entry. Now, third option is that invoices that arrive in the mail. In that case, what you would do, you're going to put them onto your scanning device, and you're going to scan them to your Titanium file. And then again, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to open up that Titanium file. Those invoices are going to be sitting in there. And then you're just going to go ahead and you're going to pull them in. Here are the invoices, sorry. Okay, actually we'll go back one level. Right here. Okay, so this is my example. I'll just go ahead, I'll grab these, pulls them all in at the same time. Here they are. I can scroll up and down again as we saw before. And then when I'm finished, I can just say, okay, I'm ready. We go ahead and acquire those invoices and they drop into my AP and purchasing entry queue. Now, let's talk about one other concept, because I was mentioning a minute ago about the email monitoring tool. So what I've been demonstrating is I keep filling in these two fields here, and let me explain what I'm doing. So I mentioned when we were talking about the workflow that's associated with Titanium that we don't send invoices off to the approvers immediately. They go into AP entry first. So when I am acquiring an invoice or invoices, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select who they're going to be assigned to first, which is someone in AP or data entry. You can have multiple AP data entry groups. In my case, I do. I can choose who I want to assign the invoices to, and then I determine what type of document it is. We keep talking about invoices, but you can also acquire any other type of document, or you can acquire printed checks, and you can attach those checks to the invoices as well. So I keep filling in these two fields before I go out and I pull up my invoices. What we've done is we have created an auto acquire function that works hand in hand with this. So let's go back to that concept of email. So we get invoices in an email and they're sitting in a file. So what I could do is I could set up auto acquire where I go into that particular function, and if I wanted to, let's just use this one here. Let's say it's AP at a1electric.com, for example. Okay, so I'm getting invoices from A1 Electric into my designated AP email address. I'm automatically going to assign them to where they need to go in AP entry. I'll split those invoices. For example, if I had that scenario where I had more than one invoice that wasn't separated, I could, maybe there's something on this, on the invoices that will tell me it's, text that says invoice one of or something like that, so I can split them. and then I'm going to run them through my optical character recognition so that when they come into that email address, they're going to get automatically acquired into Titanium. No one has to go through the process of acquiring them. And they're going to be sitting in AP entry waiting for the AP entry to go ahead and start processing those invoices. So that's how deeply I'll say you can automate this to bring this down to that level and allow that auto acquire process to take place. Okay, so now we've gone about acquiring some invoices. Let's move into this screen here. So you've got two fields here, AP bill entry queue, purchasing entry queue. You notice how the same number of documents or invoices are sitting in both. The reason is when you acquire an invoice, it actually resides in both. The difference between these two are the fields that are required to fill out when you're processing an AP invoice. If you're processing an AP invoice against a purchase order from Sage Intacct, you're going to definitely want to use the purchasing entry queue. Now you can use it for essentially for all of your entry if you want, but I'll show you the bill entry queue in a minute and explain to you why it might be easier for something that's not associated with purchasing, where it might be easier to just use the bill entry. So let's start here. I'm just going to go ahead and call up an invoice. And I want to just highlight a few things with regard to this. So if you recall when we were back in TimberScan, how I called up an invoice and I mentioned that the invoice data entry grid replicates the data entry from in this case, Sage 300 CRE. Here in Titanium, we've done the exact same thing. We've taken the invoice data from Sage Intacct, we pull it back into Titanium, and we're able to process invoices as if they were being processed into Sage Intacct, but we've built a number of tools in here that create an advantage for you to be able to process your invoices through here. One of those is the optical character recognition tool that we have. So you'll notice that on this particular invoice image, some of the fields are already highlighted in different colors. What we've done with our OCR is we have a function or a tool called Smart Extraction. What Smart Extraction does is it goes out and it looks for certain key information on the invoice. And when it finds it, it will then take that data and it will populate the invoice entry screen for you automatically. So for example, the invoice number, the invoice date, the due date, the dollar amount. If you look on the AP invoice entry, the invoice date is here, already populated. The let's keep going over here a little bit further. The bill number, that's the invoice number that Sage Intacct references their invoice numbers as bill number. The due date is here. If the dollar amount, I don't know if the dollar amount is needed on the header line, but the whole idea is that we're extracting information off of an invoice. There's nothing that I did from an OCR perspective. I didn't have to set up a template in order to get this. This just came in automatically. So you acquire an invoice and immediately off the off of this particular screen, I'm getting this particular information. So we look at this. Now, another thing that you can also do here, for example, the vendor number. So you'll notice that in this case, the vendor number has already been filled in. Somebody has already started processing this invoice a little bit, but there's a plus sign that's associated with it. So how did this, what happens here? So basically what you can do is, let's say this is the very first time that I processed a Paint Electric invoice in Titanium. So initially that vendor code wasn't filled in because it didn't recognize Paint Electric initially. So what I can do is I can go out, I can search the vendor file from Sage Intacct. I go find that particular vendor code. Once I find it and it populates this screen, I can hit this plus sign to basically say, save that as part of the coding profile. So now, whenever I receive an invoice from Paint Electric going forward, always populate the vendor code with this particular code number. Now, I'm sure you've probably heard a lot about AI and the different tools that are being used with OCR. One of the things that happens is that when you have something, which we refer to as machine learning, what happens is that you have to acquire numerous invoices. It could be 20, 30, 40 invoices before the system finally realizes, oh, okay, I've seen this Paint Electric invoice come in like 20 or 30 times now. So I'll start remembering that it's supposed to be populated with this particular vendor number. In our scenario, on the very first invoice, I put in the vendor code, I hit the plus sign, and it just automatically populates from that point forward. So that's the type of thing that you can do with the OCR. Now you can do a lot more than this. I could come in here, I could actually set it up so that, for example, Wood Elementary School becomes, my target for what I want to be able to, how I want to be able to code it and all of that. So all of that takes place with the setup of OCR, depending on how detailed you want to get with this. But the idea is that obviously we can populate much of, if not all of the header information very, very easily and very quickly on a vendor's invoice, so that as you move forward with that particular vendor, your header information is basically all filled in and it's saved, and then you don't have to worry about this. You're down in the distribution. I'm going to get to the distribution in a minute, but also wanted to mention that, a few other things with regard to AP entry. I mentioned that all of these fields replicate what happens in Sage Intacct. You don't have to keep all these. If there are certain fields that you don't feel that you don't need anymore, for example, you can just go ahead and eliminate them. Or you can shift fields around. So if I want transaction currency to be over here, I can just slide it over and I can save it so that it stays that way from that point on. You can move the screen in such a way where if I said, you know what, I want to be able to see the entire invoice image. How do we do that? Well, down here under more, what I could do is I could just say hit change mode, and now I can see the invoice image on one side, I can have my data entry on the other. Or let's say I want to keep this, I want to keep the data entry here with the kind of the wider grid. What I could also do is there's a little up arrow here where if I have dual screens, I can just take the invoice and I can slide it off to a second screen. So now I've got the invoice image on one screen, I've got my data entry on the other. So that's something else that you can do. Okay, let me back out of this particular a few other things. Let's just talk here for a few minutes about some things. Well, actually, let me do this. I am going to back out. Change my mind here. Let's go back into this particular invoice. All right, here's an invoice where what we've done is we referenced a purchase order from Sage Intacct. So it's a vendor invoice that we referenced a purchase order. And what the system did, you'll notice here, it populated all of the purchase order lines automatically as soon as that purchase order was referenced. If the purchase order happened to be a PO that was set up in Sage Intacct and the vendor happened to put the PO number on the invoice and we could find it, it would then automatically reference this and it would automatically pull up the line items from the PO or receiver. So we can go down to the PO and the receiver if need be. Obviously, I can add more lines if I needed to. But in this case, I wanted to talk about a few other things that the system does. We have these tooltips built throughout the application. So the tooltip, notice how I'm seeing, for example, here's my purchase order that I referenced. Here's the amount, the original PO, here's the amount that's been invoiced, here's what's currently in titanium, what the balance is. You notice as the balance goes negative, it highlights that for you in red. Down at the bottom, what I can do, there's something called basically my commitment summary. That would allow me to see the various commitments, and then this is the PO that we've referenced here. So this is kind of a summary of all the POs, and then I can then pull up the line items from that particular PO. So when I'm on the screen, I don't necessarily have to jump out of the application in order to go out and see pertinent information that might help me make a decision on how I go about processing and coding this invoice. It's literally right here at my fingertips. there's history. So every field on this particular screen is available to me to see history. If I wanted to look at the vendor code and I hit the history button, now I'm seeing all of the invoices for that particular vendor. It's laid out in what's kind of like an Excel spreadsheet format. So if I wanted to sort by a certain column or group or do those types of things, I can. If I actually just wanted to call it the invoice image, I could call it up right here on the screen, and I could see, the invoice itself, and I could see any of the supporting documents that may have come along with it. I've got all of that. If I can do the exact same thing for the, maybe even down to the project level. So on project, I hit history, get all the invoices for that particular project. And I can just go ahead and pull this up. Again, sort, group, do whatever I need to do. Shows me all the vendors that have been associated with this particular project. And again, when you hit the plus sign, I would actually go down to the point of seeing how that particular line was processed and coded and so on. So there's just a wealth of data and information that's literally available to me at my fingertips right here on the AP invoice entry screen. Now, ultimately, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit save and route. That invoice is going to go off to the approvers. There are a number of different scenarios that can be chosen with sending an invoice off to an approver. It basically starts in your workflow, and you'll notice that there are a lot of things here. Now, you don't have to use all of these, but depending on the complexity of your routing will determine how much of this is going to be needed. I won't get into the setup and detail of all of this, but suffice it to say that you can route an invoice by any field that's in the AP invoice entry grid. If, for example, I wanted to route by the GL posting date, I could route by that field. Now, that's, chances are you're not, it would say that the majority of clients are going to be routing by project or maybe by, by vendor, that type of thing. But just to let you know, you have every single field available to you that you can use for routing if you so choose. And then you choose who's going to get it, how many people are going to get it, what sequence, what order they're going to get it. If there are thresholds, invoices greater than a certain dollar amount need to be escalated up to another level of approval. All of that can be done. And you also can set up custom workflows. You can switch workflow users. So if I'm going to be out for a week, I'm supposed to be approving my invoices and someone else needs to be able to go in and approve them. An administrator can go in and switch me to them, let them approve my invoices. All of those things are possible. One other item, we also have something called job authorization. So an invoice, let's say, is being processed. And if I said, well, my rule is I'm going to route this off to the project manager for job 20002. When you do that, if we wanted to utilize this job authorization program, it will then go out to the project in Sage Intacct. It will find the project manager credentials in Sage Intacct, and it will then automatically assign the, this particular invoice to that particular person. Okay, all right, so we're going to hurry along here a little bit. We're starting to creep up on some time here. So let's say we've routed invoices off to approvers. From there, what we would do is an approver would come into their workflow task queue and they would see their invoices. Now you'll notice how there are different criteria here. In this case, this is an invoice where I have the option on the screen, depending on if I scroll down and I look through this information, and I say, wait a minute, I don't work with Camco Supply. They're not one of my vendors. This is not one of my invoices. I can just go ahead and reject it right here on the screen. And it will ask me, basically where I'm rejecting it, but it'll force me to put a reason. Because of the fact that this invoice does not require additional coding that needs to take place, I can potentially approve it right here as well. Where you see this function that says sync the task, basically what we're saying here is that this is not a fully coded invoice. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to open up the invoice, and I'm going to have to go through and I'm going to have to code it. Let's get a better invoice than this one. Let's go back here for just a second. Okay, here we go. So here's a scenario where, now you notice how the screen looks a little bit different for the approver than it did for the AP entry person. Your action buttons at the bottom allow you to be able to put the invoice on hold, reject it, approve it, add more documents if need be, add a note. So I can do all of those things, and under more, I've got other options, which we're going to talk about in a second. What this is, the reason why I brought this screen up in this format, and this is very hard for me to be able to simulate through just doing this off of my laptop here. But basically, the reason I did this is because the system is designed to work with what we call a responsive user interface. So if I happen to be on my phone, I could call up this invoice on my phone. I could see all the information here. I've got my ability to do all the things that we just talked about, reject it, put it on hold, all of that. I can come in here and I can actually do coding. So if I needed to make any changes, so maybe I've got to go in here and I've got to say, let's look at this particular item. I need to put in the cost type. So I go ahead and I call it my cost types. I'll say it's labor. So I've gone ahead and done that. I've made that change, and then I can go ahead and approve it. I'm sitting on my phone and I'm doing this. So it allows for you to be able to approve invoices from anywhere. It's not restricted to, I've got to come into the office, I've got to sit at my desk, and I have to approve my invoices. It's flexible. It allows you, I could be out in the field somewhere. I could be in my car, not driving, but in my car, and I go ahead and open up the invoice, and I look at this and say, yeah, let me get this invoice approved while I'm waiting here. Or you know what, I'm going to go ahead and code this, or I'm going to put a note on it, and I'm going to let someone know that we need to, there's certain, something has to be executed here before we want to go ahead and pay this. If you put an invoice on hold, you reject it. I mentioned rejecting earlier, but either on hold or reject, you have to put a reason in as to why you're doing that. That way, if anyone else wants to see what the status is, they can see it. Okay. Invoices get approved. Once they work their way through the approval process, they end up updating Sage Intacct. Over here, let's go to Sage Intacct right here. Here's an invoice that got sent over from Titanium. It's now sitting in Sage Intacct. And if you notice, when I scroll down here, there's an attachment button here. I can just go ahead and I can call up that particular invoice, and I can call up any of the supporting documents associated with it right here from within Sage Intacct. So not only do we send over the data, we also send over the images to allow you to be able to see everything in basically in a packet. Now, one other thing that's also of note, since I happen to bring this particular invoice up, you notice how this particular approval page has been attached to the invoice. We do this automatically. So basically, this is an audit log that gets attached to every single invoice once the invoice has been processed to let you know every iteration of the invoice, when it was initially received and by whom, who entered it and when, who are the approvers, who posted this, so that it's now sitting updated in Sage Intacct. So you can go back and you can track that anytime you need to. Okay? All right. So we've gone through that workflow process. We've been able to manage the invoice from the time that it arrived at our door. We sent it through its approvals. It is now updated Sage Intacct. And then once it updates Sage Intacct, let's say that we wanted to go ahead and we wanted to pay this particular invoice. So basically what we have is we have the ability to capture data that you would normally send from the AP, print pay bills function and send it off. And instead of having to go in here to where you would go to your print checks and actually print those checks out on physical check stock, we can capture that data if you so choose and pull it back into Titanium. What that would do is it would give you the opportunity in Titanium to see a couple of different things. Under pay control, what I could do is I could use this as a payment approval tool. So I'm in here, I'm seeing basically what looks like a check that we would have generated from Sage Intacct with the check number that was assigned from Sage Intacct, the check stub, and here are the invoices here in the middle that check referenced. Notice how over here, I'm actually seeing, let me just make this, you can see it a little better. There we go. I'm now seeing that invoice and I'm seeing any of the supporting documents associated with it. So the idea behind this is there are a number of companies who someone will go through and they'll print a batch of checks and then they'll hand those checks off to someone who has to go through and approve, sign off on those checks before they get released. So what we've done is we've created an electronic replication of that process. We've automatically attached the check to the invoice. So this doesn't have to be done manually, where I've got to go out, I've got to print the check, and I got to, paper clip the check to the invoice and the supporting documents. It's all done for me right here on the screen. And then that person who has to sign off can just say, okay, yeah, I'm ready to go ahead and approve this. Or no, you know what, hang on, let's put this one on hold for right now. We'll come back to it. Or you can reject it and void that particular payment. We're never going to pay this one. So it gives you that flexibility. If you say you want to go ahead and approve this, then what it does is it passes that invoice or that payment to the Avid Pay Network. And then Avid goes ahead and pays that particular vendor on your behalf. There are three methods with which the vendor can choose to be paid. They can be paid by a virtual card, they can be paid by an ACH option, or they can be paid by check. Some vendors say, no, we still want to be paid by check. So we'll just go ahead and cut them a check. Now, once it's been released to the pay network, you also have this pay inquiry. What the pay inquiry does is it gives you the opportunity to see what the status of any payment is that went to the pay network. So if I use, for example, this A1 Electric here in the middle, I can see how it was paid, virtual card. I can see the vendor ID, the vendor number. I can see the bank account. I can see the check number that was assigned from Sage Intacct. I can see that the status was cleared. Okay, so let's use this one as our example. If I hit the plus sign, it will show me, get bogged out here, apologies. So let's go back to that pay inquiry real quick. And we will go to A1 Electric, as we saw before, this cleared payment. I hit the plus sign. So I refer to this as kind of the UPS tracker. This is showing me everything that takes place with that payment once it hits the pay network to the time that it first arrived there to when it got paid and cleared. So you always have access to be able to see that. You can also, if you wanted to, you can generate or look at any given point this proof of payment document. Proof of payment gets automatically generated once that pay process takes place, and it automatically attaches to the accounts payable invoice. And then of course I can always attach this to a document if I needed to. So it gives you that ability to be able to manage, release payments when you're ready, and also view what happens once the payment goes to the Avid Pay Network. And with that, we've kind of walked through the entire workflow process. So I'm going to stop at this point and let's open it up for any questions. So Megan, if you want to just go ahead and see what we have for questions in the chat or what have you, we can take it from there.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we do have a few questions. The first one is the sender email recognition manually entered at the time of implementation?
The sender email recognition. Okay, so where it's coming from, is that manually entered? No. It's set up behind the scenes, so it doesn't have to be manually entered every time. It's set up and it's saved so that I believe that's the question. The context of the question is, do we have to constantly enter that sender's email address at the time of the execution? The answer is no.
Okay, great, thank you. And then on another one, on the invoice import, there was an error. Invoice states Payne, but vendor states Pacific. Are these different? How do you identify errors?
Oh, on the vendor, oh yeah, okay. So correct, yes. So in my sample data, I don't happen to have in my Sage Intacct database, I don't happen to have a Payne Electric vendor code. So I just happen to use Pacific. Now, it's a good point. So the system, it's going to require when you first process an invoice for that particular vendor, that you're going to select the right vendor code. If you don't, then you're correct. There potentially Payne Electric invoices could get charged to Pacific. There's no way for the system to be able to say, there's anything that gives us an indication that this is an error. It just so happened in my case, I don't have a Payne Electric vendor code, so that's why I use Pacific in my example. But I get it, I understand. But yeah, there's nothing that that will go through and say, you know what, you used the wrong vendor number. Just like if I were keying this into Sage 300 CRE or to Sage Intacct, it's not going to tell me I used the wrong vendor code there either.
Excellent. Okay. Another question. Does it work for subcontracts as well? Also, does it work with Procore?
Okay. Two good questions. Yes, it does work with subcontracts. No problems. If you wanted to process your G702, 703s, you can do that through here, and it will recognize some of this key information as well. With Procore, we are in our TimberScan application. We built an integration to Procore a few years ago. We are finalizing the integration from Procore to Titanium for Sage Intacct, and we plan to have that finished by the end of this year. So what it will do is it will allow you to take the data from Procore, pull it into Titanium, and then pass that data over to Sage Intacct. The beauty of that is that when we pass that data, it will also pass an invoice image, which you're not getting currently by having that data go from Procore directly into Sage Intacct. So we're going to have it come through Titanium, and you're going to get an invoice image attached.
Great, thank you for that answer. Does anybody have any more questions? Please type them into the questions box now. No, it doesn't seem to be like we have any more questions. Thank you, Mike. It was a great webinar. And with that, if there are no more questions, we will conclude the webinar. Thank you again for joining us and have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye now.